record. So definitely want to be recording. And while we wait a couple of minutes to let some people hop on, I would highly recommend that you grab a notebook or some paper, or open a new Google document or whatever you use for taking notes, because there's lots of great stuff in this webinar. And also we're going to be doing a little journal exercise. So find something to write with, open a new document, whatever you need. And we're going to give people a few more minutes to hop on, and then we will get started. And also, it's really weird to just be talking into my computer like this, I have to say. I've taught this workshop many times in person, but this is my first time teaching it to the computer. So, feeling a little nervous. Okay, so a few more people joining in, and I'm sure people will just join as they get settled in. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to Breaking the Curse of Menstruation. I am so excited to be sharing this information and sharing this workshop with you online. We are going to spend about an hour together, and we are going to talk about all kinds of stuff related to menstruation. And hopefully we can help to undo some taboos, dispel some myths, some outright lies that we've been told about menstruation, and really start to unpack the shame so that we can have a better period. So I'm going to start off by introducing myself. So if you don't already know me, my name is Amanda Laird. I'm a registered holistic nutritionist. I specialize in menstrual and hormonal health, and I offer one-on-one coaching sessions to people to help them decode their menstrual cycles and have a better period. I also am the host of the Heavy Flow podcast, and I just finished writing my first book, which is called Heavy Flow, Breaking the Curse of Menstruation. And I'm so excited. That's going to be out early in the new year. So it'll be February 23rd, 2019 if you're in Canada. And if you're in the US, it is coming out a few weeks later on March 19th, 2019. And I am so excited to share that with you. But today we are going to lay the groundwork in this workshop. So the number one question that I get whenever I'm doing an interview or I'm at a dinner party, people want to know how I came to be interested in periods. And the answer is I've really always been interested in reproductive health and sex and bodies and wellness. And from the time that I first learned what periods were, I was so excited to get my period. And I remember being in, elementary school, maybe grade 5 or grade 6, and my best friend Nadia and I would pretend to have menstrual cramps. I guess for all I know, Nadia really did have menstrual cramps, but I was certainly lying and pretending I had no cramps. And, this is a funny story looking back, but I also think it's really telling that I associated menstruation with being grown up, with being a woman, but at the same time, I immediately associated it with something that was painful and uncomfortable. So I think it's really telling that even as a little girl who is 10, 11, 12 years old, it was really cramps. That was the context of which I understood menstruation. Of course, cramps being pain. So tonight we are going to talk about the curse. So there are two prongs to how menstruation is classified as a curse. On one hand, we have the pain and the discomfort and all the symptoms that have given it the nickname the curse. And on the other side, we have all the ways that menstruation has been used as a way to oppress women and other female bodies throughout history. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I want to be really clear that tonight, this is part one. So there is so much to unpack when it comes to menstruation. I couldn't fit it all in one hour webinar. So tonight, we're really going to be talking about the cultural associations and the history of shame. And then in part two, which I'm going to be offering in December, we're going to go into those practical tools like nutrition, like products, like what we can do to manage our symptoms in various ways. So that stuff we're going to save till December. Tonight, it's really, part feminist theory, part anatomy. So to start off, I hope you've had a chance to grab something to write with, because I just wanted to take a few minutes to come together and really drop into this space and really start to think about our own experiences with menstruation and menstrual shame. So this exercise is just for you. It's going to be private. You don't have to share it. But I want you to take a few minutes to think about and to write about a time when you felt like you were ashamed of your period. So for me, I always think about the time that I was at school and I could tell that my pad leaked before I had even got out of my chair. The irony is I was in health class and I was so afraid that my pad had leaked. And sure enough, I shuffled with my legs, half crossed, but still walking to the bathroom. And sure enough, I had leaked and it had stained my jeans. And this was something that I was so afraid of being found out. So let's take a few minutes to think and write about a time that you felt ashamed with your period, about your period. And then I also want you to think about, where did you learn to be ashamed of your period? And who do you think was benefiting from that shame? So I'm going to mute my microphone. I want you to take a few minutes to think about that, and then we will dive into the rest of the webinar. Okay, so I hope you've all had a chance to think about that. And let's move on. So, what is so shameful about periods, anyways, right? So, at its most basic function, menstrual blood is some blood. It's no different than the blood that's in the rest of your body, although it does have some extra stem cells and some other things like that. But for the most part, it's the same type of blood. There's a little bit of tissue from the lining of the uterus, and there's some mucus. And, you know, the function of our menstrual cycle is to prepare our body for pregnancy. If we become pregnant, there's a nice, fluffy lining in our uterus to nourish an embryo and nourish a baby. And if we don't become pregnant, the lining is shed, and we start the cycle over again the next month. And the hormones that we make at various points during our menstrual cycle are important for all aspects of our health and wellness, not just our reproductive health. So estrogen and progesterone, these hormones have an effect on everything from our appetite to our sleep, to our mood, to our energy levels. And this all happens in our menstrual cycle. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Yet it's so shameful. Why is that? And that is because we have assigned this meaning to it in our culture. And if we back up and start to think about what it might have been like many, 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 many years ago, like early peoples, right? Early civilizations. Imagine what it must have been like to witness a menstruating woman, right? So we associate blood with death. So maybe, you know, you're mauled by a tiger, or there's, you know, you fall off a cliff and there's lots of blood and you bleed out and you die. But here there is female bodies that are bleeding, not dying, plus they are doing it again about 28 days, about a moon cycle later. And I'm sure that it didn't take long for them to also associate that the bleeding stopped during pregnancy and that a baby was born after the bleeding had stopped for some time. And so it's really easy when you think about it in that context, and we're just drawing some assumptions here, that it was, oh, sorry, somebody popped up. It's easy to make that assumption that menstruation was something that was misunderstood, it was feared, but at the same time, it was also revered because it was connected to life, and yet it was also connected to death through blood. So, hang on a second, I can hear somebody. Sorry, I just needed to put somebody on mute there. So it's also associated with creation, but also with death because of the blood. So there was also, for centuries and centuries and centuries, a very limited understanding, or I should say a misunderstanding of what menstruation was even about. And even today, we really look at it only in the concept of fertility, and we don't talk about these other benefits that our hormonal health gives us. So if our menstrual cycle is just a bodily function, we haven't, what are other bodily functions? Sleeping, digesting food, our heart beating, and those things are not shameful, right? It is the meaning that we have assigned to menstruation that makes it shameful. So it's something that is constructed, usually by men. And so who do we have to thank for menstrual shame? And it's been constructed over years of patriarchy, gender bias within the medical system, but a lot of it has to do with this guy here on the left. This is Pliny the Elder. He was a Roman author and a naval commander, and he died in 77 or 79 Common Era, so way back when the years were just double digits. And he wrote a book called Natural History. And this was literally the book on everything. It covered all kinds of subjects from medicine to nature, everything, like everything was in this book. And it's important to note that this text really went unchallenged until about the 1600s. So for over 1,000 years, actually over like 1,500 years, this was really the book of natural history. And Pliny had a lot to say about menstruation. So he believed that it could turn wine sour, it would spoil crop yields, it could turn dogs mad. If a menstruating woman happened to look at a horse who was pregnant, it would cause the horse to miscarriage just by looking at the horse. And my personal favorite of Pliny's theories is that if a hunter had sex with a menstruating woman under a full moon, the prey that he was going to try and hunt would sense this and stay away, and the hunt would be unsuccessful. Yet at the same time, Pliny also had all of these good things that menstruation was for, or that menstrual blood could do. And in particular, it could also help to fertilize fields. So a naked woman could walk through, a naked menstruating woman could walk through a field to help fertilize the field. So I don't know how it could kill the crops, but then fertilize it. But either way, this really shows that this was powerful stuff, right? They really looked, from earliest times, they really looked at menstruation as something that was very powerful. And that power, particularly when it was tied to creation, and therefore it was tied to something mystical or divine, because we've never really been able to quite explain our existence, that power was something that people needed to be protected from. So non-menstruators needed to be protected from this power, and there lies the birth of the menstrual taboos. So you've probably heard about in faraway places or faraway times that when you were menstruating, you weren't allowed to eat with the rest of your family or the rest of your community, or you were relegated to a menstrual hut, or you would retreat to the red tent. You weren't able to worship. And these rules were designed to segregate menstruating people and protect other people, usually men, from the gross, dirty, powerful, whatever they were thinking, however they viewed menstruation to be. There is, some people do suggest that women voluntarily retreated during menstruation, and that this was a time for them to rest, to connect with, sorry, I got distracted by something that popped up. So there was an idea, some people believe that red tent, or this time was during menstruation, retreating to the red tent was something that women wanted, right? It's really unclear when you look through the history books, like, is this something that women instituted but then men upheld, or was this something that men instituted but then women were like, actually, this isn't so bad that I don't have to cook or clean or take care of my kids during this time? So that is also, I just wanted to put that out there, that is a possibility as well. Of course, when we hear these stories about believing that menstrual blood can turn our wine sour or drive dogs mad, it seems kind of silly, right? Of course, now we know so much more about menstruation, right? Or so we think. But all throughout history, even as we were able to challenge these myths, menstruation has been used as proof of the female body's inferiority all throughout history. And for a long time, I would even argue still today, we really look at the female body as the other type of body. So a male body is kind of like the perfect ideal body, and the female form or anything that varies from that male form is inferior, it's imperfect. Perhaps, there have been medical historians or medical scholars who've said in no uncertain terms that it's a deformity of the male body. And when we think about this in modern times, it sounds silly, but we still have our own menstrual taboos and our own menstrual myths that we're upholding today. So in North America and in the Western world, provided that menstrual pain isn't preventing us from living our lives, we can pretty much go about our daily lives when we're menstruating. And we owe a lot of thanks to the makers of modern menstrual products for that. So in the early 20th century, disposable pads, sanitary belts, which you can see up here. After the war, we started to be introduced to tampons. These disposable products were kind of a blessing, and as we'll learn about as we go on, a curse for menstruating bodies, right? Because before we had disposable products, we were using rags or cloth pads or just pieces of fabric. We would probably stay close to home because in order to manage our menstrual blood. And now we have disposable products that are more sanitary, they're easy to use, we don't have to worry about changing them as frequently as we would like a rag or a cloth pad. And so we're seeing in this early 20th century, with the dawning of disposable products, that you can start to kind of go out into the world when you're menstruating. So that's a really amazing thing, of course, right? And as public health became more of a priority, disposable products grew in popularity because we wanted the things that were cleaner or more sanitary. And these things are important. I don't want to make it sound like I'm poo-pooing on sanitation, because I'm not. But they were also a premium luxury item, right? Not everybody had the money to afford these disposable products. And of course, that is still the same today. Now, in order to sell these disposable products, we needed to start marketing them. And one of the tools that these companies that created disposable products started to use was they would publish booklets or pamphlets about puberty. So here's one today called "Have You Read the New Booklet? One Girl to Another." So this would have been a book that was distributed to adolescent girls. It would have taught them about menstruation, because before this time as well, there's no widespread education, first of all, and second of all, there was no widespread health education. So you hear a lot of stories from women or from young girls who got their period and didn't even know what was happening. That was not uncommon. Maybe you learned about periods from your mother, from an older sister, from a friend, but our limited understanding of menstruation and just culture, like that wasn't something that you talked about back then. So there was a lot of girls who are getting their first period, don't know what it is. And so this marketing was introduced to teach them about their periods, but also to instill brand loyalty, right? Because you send away for this booklet and you will also get a free gift, or you'll get a free sample of sanitary napkins or tampons or what have you. So they were really using education as a way to build brand loyalty. And at the same time, they were really perpetuating, or they were really starting to manufacture these myths that are still used in our menstrual product marketing today, that we still believe today, because they really often position menstruation as an illness. It's something that was wrong with you. You were unwell during your menses. Many of them cautioned against being active or going out in the rain. There's one that cautioned against letting your ankles get cold because this was all, would all like give you a worse period or would make you more sick, right? And more often than not, they stress the importance of staying clean and being discreet during your period. And sure enough, this is still the same today. This is how menstrual products are marketed to us even in 2018, right? Many of us probably learned about menstruation through product marketing, right? You might have learned about it through commercials or advertisements in a magazine. And you might also not have realized that in many, many places in North America, puberty education is sponsored content. And these manufacturers of these products are still publishing guides and support materials for. Hang on just 1 second. Okay, Maisie, I'm teaching. Good night. Sorry about that. And so puberty education is sponsored by these big companies, and you might not have even known that. And they're sending free booklets, they're sending free kits, they're sending samples into classrooms. And, I wish it was because these companies really value education and want to make sure that kids are body literate and they understand the changes that they're going from. But the reality is they're just trying to ensure brand loyalty from their very, very first period and from puberty. And so even today, many of us are relating to our menstrual cycles through advertising or through products. Certainly, it's not appropriate to discuss menstruation outside the context of products, if at all. And the conventional products that you buy in the drugstore, so things like pads and tampons, those mainstream brands that I'm sure you can think about, they're still using this mysterious blue liquid to sell their products. So they're not even using red fluid or blood. And certainly, this does pop up every so often. There is some brand who wants to do something like really cutting edge, and so they'll use red in their marketing. But the first time blood was actually depicted in a menstrual product ad wasn't until 2011. So that wasn't even that long ago. And, these products are still stressing, preventing odors, leak-free, incredible protection. So this idea that you need to stay clean and that your period is something that needs to be concealed and that is dirty and gross, these are the messages that we are getting from this product advertising. And they're advertising to us in our sex ed classrooms. And so from the get-go, we are just being told that this is something that needs to be managed. It's not important. It's gross. And it needs to be concealed at all times. And, I think it's important to note that these companies, there's really 4 very large companies that kind of make up the most conventional mainstream drugstore brands. As of this year or last year, the menstrual product industry made up $15 billion worldwide. Yes, that was with a B. And it's expected to just keep growing and growing and growing over the years. As, our population grows, we're always going to menstruate. They're going into new markets, untapped markets. So that 15 billion is just going to balloon to even more. And that 15 billion also doesn't account for things like pain medication, or wipes or washes or any other sundries that are sold kind of in relation to your menstrual products. That's literally just the pads and tampons. And, these companies are making a lot of money, as I said, off of your shame. They're perpetuating taboos, and also they're using plastic in their products, right? Tampon applicators are plastic. They're wrapped in plastic. They're packaged in plastic, and then they're shipped in plastic. We don't even know what type of, plastic or other ingredients go into the manufacturing process, right? So they're bad for the environment. As you can see here, this was a Google image search that I had pulled down for tampon applicators on beaches. And I just found pages and pages of photos of tampon applicators that have been washed up on beaches or were in landfills. So they're also using chemicals, things like fragrance, to keep you for that odor protection. They're putting fragrance in there, bleach, other chemicals. The reality is we don't even know exactly what's in pads and tampons because these companies don't have to disclose them. And in recent years, there has been public pressure to disclose the information. And so some of them have included them voluntarily, either generally not on packaging. It's more so on their website. Pardon me, you have to really dig to find them, but that's only the final product. So anything that they're using, like dioxins or bleaches or fragrance or anything else that they're doing to make them lily white and to be scented, doesn't even have to be disclosed, because they're only disclosing the final end product, like what is literally in that box, not what's going into the processing. And the reality is a lot of these chemicals are very bad for our bodies, or we don't know how bad they are for our bodies or the effects that they're going to have on our bodies, or we don't understand how these chemicals work when they're absorbed through the vaginal canal versus, through other means of absorbing the chemicals. And I would be remiss if I also didn't point out that back in the 1980s, during the toxic shock crisis, they killed women. Their products killed women. And that has all but been erased. And that's not something that is, generally understood or generally talked about. And while I'm very pleased with the recent, period positive movement, period power movement, and as we're moving towards more menstrual awareness and menstrual equity, we're not talking about the women who died from toxic shock back in the 1980s. So I always like to point that out in this context. So by now, I'm hoping that you're all good and mad. And you might be thinking, what does this all mean, right? Should we all be free bleeding and proud? Should we be talking about our periods all the time? This is a Danish cartoon that I found online when I was putting this together. And the caption is, "When your wife and daughters are free bleeding." And I thought that was kind of funny. And the answer is no, of course not. If not using menstrual products and free bleeding is what speaks to you, I 100% support that. But, we also need to have safe and effective products to manage menstruation, and we need access to clean water, and we need privacy. And that's not just something that I'm saying. That's actually something that was set out by the United Nations Human Rights Council. And you have to dig in to find it. It's not something that we hear about often, if at all, but the United Nations has stated that access to menstrual products, access to water, access to privacy to manage menstruation is a human right. And I also want to say, there is a difference between keeping something private if we want to. So, I talk about periods all the time. It's something I'm very comfortable with, but I also recognize that, it's also not something that's that interesting. My period's not that interesting. And I totally support somebody who wants to keep menstruation private, but there's a difference between keeping something private if we want and something that is secret. And certainly that's how menstruation has been positioned for generations. It's secret, it's shameful, it's something that needs to be concealed. We need to use products that have been designed so that we never see the blood. We never even have to touch our own bodies. We never have to interact with our menstruation, which is really what this industry has conditioned us to think. And, there's larger issues that ties to capitalism and productivity, and I just don't have enough time to go deep into all those issues for now. So where do we go from here? And I love this quote from Elizabeth Kissling. She wrote a book called Capitalizing on the Curse, The Business of Menstruation. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it to anyone. And Elizabeth writes, only once we are educated about our cycles and the cultural associations can we recognize it for what it really is, not a shameful secret, but a fact of life that need not be concealed. And I hope that over the last half an hour or so, I've really been able to shine a light for you on how menstruation has been misplaced in our culture as something that is dirty, is something that is shameful, is something that is gross. And, before we move on to kind of the good things about menstrual cycles, and why we want to be having good, healthy menstrual cycles and how it benefits our health and wellness, I also just want to point out that for centuries, so much of this misunderstanding about what the menstrual cycle is or why we menstruate was really perpetrated by men. And it was men who are doing medical research and medical experiments quite often on people of color against their will. And so many of them who were writing and theorizing about menstruation didn't even think to ask women what the experience was like or what they thought about it. And, menstruation has been something that has been used as a tool of the patriarchy forever. And there is no bodily function that is equal to it in a male body, which, when I was researching for my book, I saw one author theorize that menstrual shame just came down to males being jealous that they didn't get their periods, which that always makes me chuckle. So now that we're understanding the cultural context, let's dive into our period and why it is something that we should be paying attention to, why it is important to our overall health and wellness, and what's normal and what's not. So earlier, when I explained kind of the nutshell example of like why we menstruate, we quite often, I talked immediately about fertility, right? That's the first place that we always go to. And certainly I remember when I first learned about menstruation, I was told, well, you're a woman now you can have a baby. And we quite often only look at our menstrual cycle within the context of fertility. But there's lots of other reasons why we want to be having a menstrual cycle. So as I said earlier, the hormones that are implicated in our menstrual cycles also contribute to breast health, bone health, heart health, brain health, and we have progesterone to thank for all of that. And, I think it's really important to note here that the diseases that women are most at risk for post-menopause are breast cancer, heart disease, and osteoporosis. So having good, healthy menstrual cycles, ovulating regularly, making progesterone, which is going to give us those bone, breast, heart, and brain health benefits in our premenopausal years is going to set us up for better health post-menopause. And in this day and age, the average life expectancy for women is 85 years in Canada. I'm sure that, that might be getting even a little bit higher. Certainly I hear about lots of grandmothers who are 90 in their 90s or hundreds. So now we're almost living as long post-menopause as we did from the time of menarche to menopause. So we're living more than half our lives not menstruating. So it's really important that we're setting ourselves up for good health now. Hormones also support bodily processes. So there are estrogen receptors in every cell, in every organ in our body. Progesterone also acts on more than just our ovaries, and it helps with our sleep, our mood, our appetite, our energy. Some studies have even suggested that, we're chattier at different parts of our cycle. We choose different types of partners depending on where we are in our menstrual cycle. And so this idea that we're only hormonal maybe in our PMS window or the week that we're menstruating isn't actually quite accurate. We are hormonal every minute of every day because our hormones make our body tick. And of course, some people who menstruate really feel like their menstrual cycle gives them a connection to nature, to cycles, to the seasons, and to the wise woman tradition that has existed for generations and generations before us. And last but certainly not least, my favorite benefit to the menstrual cycle, getting in touch with our menstrual cycle, is the ability to cultivate body literacy. So if we think about literacy in the classic sense, it's reading or writing. And somebody who is illiterate is kind of deprived of opportunities, education, advancement. And the same can be applied to the body. When we have body literacy, we can understand, we can read and interpret the signs that our body is telling us. We can then therefore care for our bodies in a different way. We can advocate for ourselves in sexual relationships, in medical settings, and we can make decisions that are fully informed about our healthcare, about our sexuality, about reproduction, about healthcare, you name it. So body literacy is very important. And as I said earlier, our menstrual cycle is really crucial to our overall health and wellness. And I love this quote from Dr. Laird. She's a naturopathic doctor. She wrote an incredible book called The Period Repair Manual. And she writes that your period is not just your period. It's an expression of your underlying health. When you are healthy, your menstrual cycle will arrive smoothly, regularly, and without undesirable symptoms. And when we are unhealthy in some way, your cycle will tell the story. And so what she is saying here is that our menstrual cycle is like a window into our overall health. Our menstrual cycle is a vital sign. A vital sign is something like our blood pressure or our pulse, something that is a unit of measure that determines, how healthy you are or how well you are. And the same can be said for our menstrual cycle. So there is certainly things that we have accepted as normal in our culture, things like painful periods, mood swings, any type of PMS, but that's simply not true. Those things are common, not normal, and we'll come back to that in a second. And, there really is, a template. No, that's not the word I wanted to say. There are some parameters for what a healthy menstrual cycle should look like. So 28 days is the number that we're often told when we are learning about menstrual cycle, is that's how long a menstrual cycle is. But you can see here that the average length actually could vary between 21 to 35 days. 28 days is just the average. So you can be a week on either side of that. And within that, 2 or 3 to 7 days of bleeding is ideal. If you're bleeding longer than a week, that's certainly something that's a red flag that you would want to look into. And 80 milliliters of flow over the course of your entire period is what's normal in terms of volume. So 80 milliliters is really only about 16 regular tampons or 2.5 Diva cups. So it's actually not that much. And we want our menstrual blood to be bright red, cranberry, jewel tone, and free of clots. Certainly a little bit of clotting on the first day of our cycle can be normal and to be expected. But if we're seeing large clots that are larger than the size of, say, a quarter or a toonie for my Canadian listeners, that is too big and something that we definitely want to talk to a doctor about. And we don't want to be seeing PMS symptoms, so physical symptoms or emotional symptoms. So I'm just going to pull up a slide here about some of the things that we have accepted as common that are definitely not normal. So any type of pain, whether that's, abdominal cramping. I have been blessed with lower back pain and crampiness with my menstrual cycle. PMS, polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, very common. It's estimated that about 1 in 10 have PCOS. Endometriosis, which is classified by, or the primary symptom of endometriosis is very painful periods and very heavy periods and a lot of pain. Oftentimes it's not even relegated to your menstrual week or when you have your period. Every day of your cycle, you can experience endometriosis pain. And again, 1 in 10 suffer from endometriosis. Ovarian cysts, absolutely quite common, not normal. Breast pain or breast tenderness in the weeks leading up to or during your period. Infertility issues, where we see rising rates of infertility, both male and female, but female in particular, that is a sign that something else is going on. Amenorrhea, which is the absence of periods, cramping, depression, and anxiety. The caveat here is that our hormones do affect our mood. And so we shouldn't be expecting to feel exactly the same every single day. And there should be some, up and down. So when we're in the second half of our cycle, when after ovulation and we're making progesterone, it's normal to tend to feel a little lower energy, a little lower mood. You want to be turning inward, but we don't want to be feeling depressed or heightened anxiety or, really severe mood swings. Or I hear often women will say they get the PMS rage or suicidal ideation. Like, these things are definitely not normal and should be cause for concern if we're really feeling like we're fluctuating wildly. Irregular periods, also something that is quite common but not normal. When I talk about irregular periods, I love to put it in that context of 21 to 35 days. I've talked to so many people who have felt like they had irregular periods, but as it turns out, their periods were just 31 or 35 or 23 days. And they thought that because their cycles weren't 28 days exactly, that they had irregular periods. So it's good to do some tracking to really understand what's normal and then get to know what's normal for you. But irregular periods would be if you have, very long, more than 35 days between periods. And if there's, fluctuation month to month. So 1 month you might go 40 days, then you're going 120 days, then it's 60 days. And generally, if you are having wildly irregular periods like that, that's a symptom of something like PCOS or a sign of a hormonal imbalance or something else that's going on. And last, but certainly not least on this list, is fibroids. So fibroids are very common, particularly if you're older than 35, 40 years old. Generally, they resolve themselves in menopause. And fibroids are something that disproportionately affects women of color as well. So we see fibroids quite commonly. I'm sorry, I didn't jot down what the stats are, but it's quite common to see fibroids in all women, but in particular, women of color, it disproportionately affects that demographic. And some women experience a lot of pain, very heavy bleeding with fibroids, and some people have absolutely no symptoms at all. And the fibroid is only discovered through a routine pelvic exam. And so there's a huge kind of disparity about what a fibroid experience could be. And generally, we see that they resolve themselves in menopause or after menopause. So just a short list of what's common and not normal. And certainly if you join me on December the 9th, we're going to get into some of the tools that we can use to have a better period. Nutrition stuff, lifestyle, products, stress, all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. But for now, we have a few more minutes before we have to wrap it up. So if anybody has any questions, you can pop them into the chat box and I would be happy to answer them. So if you have a question, pop it in. Okay. The question is, will there be a part 2? And the answer is absolutely. I will be sending out a link to everyone who subscribed to part 1 and joined me tonight. I will be sending out a link where you can register for part 2. You can join me live, or you can listen to the recording as well. So stay tuned for that. So before we go, I did want to take a few more minutes to go back, and certainly if a question pops up while we're doing this, that's great. I will be happy to answer your question. So I just wanted to revisit the experience that you journaled about earlier. So thinking about that time or times, because maybe there's multiple experiences where you felt shame or you felt that menstrual taboo show up in your life, and thinking about what you know now about where the shame came from and also how important our menstrual cycle is to our overall health and wellness. Let's take a minute just to revisit that and see how we feel about that experience. So I'm going to put myself on mute again and give you a few minutes to think and reflect and journal on that. And then we'll come back in a few minutes and sign off to say goodnight. Okay, so I hope you had a chance to really think about some of your own experiences, get deeper connected to your own menstrual cycle, and start thinking about what's normal and what's not. So I want to say thank you for everybody who joined me live tonight. It means so much to be here with you, and to anybody listening to the recording, thanks for tuning in. Of course, you can go to my website, amandalaird.ca. There you can find almost 80 episodes of the Heavy Flow podcast, where we're talking about everything from menstruation, from shame and taboo to gender bias to nutrition to everything in between. And of course, details about my book, Heavy Flow, Breaking the Curse of Menstruation, are on my website, and I will have some big news and announcements coming out in the new year, in early 2019, about pre-orders and some bonus stuff and events. And yeah, that's it for me. So thanks again for joining me. You can visit me at amandalaird.ca, or you can follow me on Instagram at amandalaird. And I can't wait to share more and hear about your menstrual experiences. So thank you so much.